I like more than anything else in the meditations, and I love it, is Marcus's theory of strange beauty. He recognizes beauty in things that are normally considered homely or even ugly. He describes, for example, the furrows on a lion's brow or slobber dripping from a boar's mouth. And he says these are beautiful, and the perfected Stoic, the mature Stoic, would see them as beautiful because that Stoic would see that everything came out of nature. Even byproducts and incidental offspring of nature are beautiful because they emerge from that. And that theory of strange beauty was important to me because, in a sense, Marcus's Greek is that strange beauty, right? It's not normally considered beautiful, but it struck me as such and gave me that frisson. And so, in a way, I found a justification for my translation in the meditations itself with Marcus's theory of, yes, strange beauty.
Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. For nearly 2,000 years, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius has been a guide to resilience, virtue, and inner calm. But what if we were only been hearing half the voice? This week on Ira's Everything Bagel, I talk with acclaimed poet and translator Aaron Poochigian, whose bold new translation brings the Roman emperor off the marble pedestal and back into vivid human focus. Aaron reveals Aurelius not just as a Stoic philosopher, but as a literary stylist with candor, wit, and surprising emotional force. In a world searching for clarity and character, this fresh take on an ancient classic feels not just relevant, but urgent. Meditations, translated by Aaron Poochigian, is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Aaron, go to, as two A's, go to Aaron Poochigian, that's spelled Poochigian. I like to spell out the name, .com, aaronpoochigian.com. Follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ira.
It's a pleasure. So I have to ask the major important question, whichever I'm sure you get this all the time. What drew you to meditations and why the need for you to feel that you should translate it in a different way and bring it up to the 21st century?
When I first read Meditations in graduate school, when I was in my mid 20s, I was all in on poetry and big emotions. And so when I first read it, the work did not appeal to me particularly well, because, yes, I was, if anything, at that time, an anti-Stoic. Subsequently, though, later in my life, um, I had a number of rough years during COVID. I briefly had a drug addiction. And as I was emerging from that, I tried a bunch of different forms of meditation. Transcendental meditation, for example, forest bathing, which in Japanese is Shinrin Yoku. And I also looked again at Marcus Aurelius's Meditations in Greek. And it hit me really hard now that was older and that I'd had more life experience. Now that I had more things in my past I wanted to get over, and I had lots of anxieties about the future, including death, which is a major theme in meditations. The work really spoke to me the next time I read it. And when it came alive for me in the reading, there was a sort of frisson. I was trying to figure out what the other translations didn't capture for me that I was seeing in the Greek. And I realized that it was voice. There are distinctive voices belonging to the one man, Marcus Aurelius. In previous translations, those voices have tended to be dissolved into one formal and distant tone, using these and thous and formal language. Whereas in the original Greek, Marcus uses slang terms for obscene things. He also reveals very unflattering details about himself. And so the piece is very much one man writing to and for himself. He has no reason to be formal and aloof. And so I wanted to, I've used this analogy before, to paint the colors back on the white marble temple. There is the temple Parthenon Parthenon in Athens that's white and marble and is defines the classical in that yes, it is cold and distant, but originally that temple, the Parthenon, was painted with bright colors, and I wanted to go back not to the received conception of the classical as formal and aloof, but rather to the living classical world, the living color, as you said.
And you wouldn't have done that initially without having experienced what you experienced, as you mentioned earlier. When you translated it into this new approach, did you run it by fellow poets or scholars to get a sense of whether you were on the right track, or were you just, you wanted to put your own stamp on it?
Got it. I was very confident in the beginning that I'd found something new and that I'd found something that had been previously neglected in the translation. So I confess I was quite headstrong. I did translate all of book two first, and then I sent that in to an editor at W. Norton. He had that reviewed and he recognized, I think, that I was onto something. And so then we signed the book deal and I sat down and translated the remaining 11 books. And I have to say, it was a very pleasant experience. In many ways, more intimate than any other translation I've done, because here was a man talking to himself on the assumption that no one else would ever read his words. It was very intimate, and often we can talk about this later in the discussion. Yes, often I felt like I was Marcus's shrink, that I was sitting there as a therapist in my office, yeah, listening to him talk and analyzing his issues. I'm big on Marcus's issues, and it's not hard to tell what he's worried about in the meditations because he harps on it. He repeats sentences on that theme in various sections over and over again. Writers reveal what they're worried about in various ways, and repetition is one of them.
Were you reading it? You mentioned about the original Greek. So you were reading it in it. So you were able to read, this may sound like a naive question. You were able to read it in its original Greek text?
Yes, I went to graduate school for classics, for ancient Greek and Latin. You usually learn them both together. Marcus wrote in a kind of ancient Greek. I usually study earlier literature from the BC period, whereas Marcus is in the second century AD. But he writes in a version of ancient Greek called koine, which means common or shared Greek. It was the Greek that was spoken throughout the Roman Empire at the time, and also the Greek in which the New Testament was written, though Marcus distinguishes himself from the apostles by writing in a more classically rhetorical style.
You come across as a very passionate advocate for meditations, and yet at the same time we talk about Stoicism. How do you meld the two, or how do you reconcile those two approaches?
There, there, I should dispel some of the stereotypes about
Please,
Stoicism.
absolutely.
One of them is that it's fervorless or passionless, right? That the Stoic is unfeeling, callous, and a killjoy. There are two different portrayals of Marcus Aurelius. The one that most people are familiar with is Marcus Aurelius as the ideal philosopher king. He's beatific. He shows up that way in the film Gladiator that came out in the year 2000. In other works by scholars, he ends up a prig, right? A callous killjoy. And I see those portrayals as caricatures, not accurate, but caricatures of tendencies in his personality. And in fact, both of those portrayals go back to ancient times. The biographical sources on Marcus report both of them as well. But Marcus, despite the stereotype of the passionless Stoic, he exhibits a great religious fervor for the doctrine that he is propounding, right? He is an evangelist. He is on fire with this doctrine. And so he's certainly passionate about that. And then also, one should point out, I guess, happiness is a strong emotion. And that is one of the end results of living as a Stoic, that is, living in harmony with nature, is that you end up being happy. We'll call that a strong emotion. Yes, the ancient philosophies that include happiness, they're called eudaimonistic. I'll spell that quickly. Eudaimonistic. And that comes from the ancient Greek world for happiness. It actually, the L means well, and the daimon refers to your guiding spirit, the divine spirit that is within you. And that spirit in Marcus Aurelius, he calls it the hegemonikon, the ruling power. And that is a bit of divine rationality that has been inserted into all of us. And Marcus sees our role then is to live in obedience to that ruling power as we perform just deeds, and that will result also in our happiness. And so happiness is part of Stoicism as well as religious fervor.
I think too the idea of happiness. There's a school of thought. There's like if you go back not to the ancients, but to the 20th century, you have cybernetics, for example, and your guide to rational thinking by just spaced his last name all of a sudden, but I'll have it in a minute. But both of those talk about not necessarily being happy all the time, but by looking at things and choosing your words to tell yourself, you at least maintain a certain level of um, non-sadness. You're dealing with things. You're not making it worse than it can be. So there's this. I don't want to make it too convoluted here, but in other words, do you see those connections between going back to the ancients and what we think of as psychology in a sense, what we tell ourselves, cognitive therapy, etc.?
Yes, Marcus has been regarded historically as a source of cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the most common kind of therapy that is done today. And he takes it to a radical extreme, right?
Ellis, by the way,
He
excuse me
says,
1 second. I just thought of the name Ellis was the last name of the author
oh, Ellis, yes.
Guide to Rational Living. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh,
Wanted to get it out there before
um,
I forgot it. With pollen, my brain goes quick.
you're doing great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes. To get back to the subject of, yeah, of rationality and what we do with it, Marcus sees our happiness depending entirely on our own decisions. External things like objects, like say also situations such as not getting a job you want, not dating a person you want, or even dying, for example, right? All of those things we have to accept as they come out of nature, which is both rational and running the entire universe. And so we learn to accept everything that happens in our lives, even things that we regard as misfortunes. And this is where Marcus really endears himself to CEOs and business people. He talks about those misfortunes as obstacles, but obstacles are good in the meditations, in that they cause you to reassess the situation and see it in its true light. And also, they give you the opportunity to innovate or exhibit some other virtue than just action. You can, for example, exhibit tolerance when someone's blocking you, and thus you are still working towards your happiness by exhibiting virtues. In Marcus's philosophy, good people get the virtues. They are focused on virtuous action. All the other things in the world that don't have anything to do with virtue, those are he calls them objects of indifference. And so, say if a tornado trashes your house, destroys your house, right? You might see that as a misfortune, but you are mistaken. It is an event that nature has given you. Nature is good. And so that event can only be good. And at first, I was hesitant to accept that. But then I thought back on my own experience at disappointments I had, where, for example, I didn't get a job that I want, right? An academic job that I wanted. But then I realized now that I have this perspective, I'm grateful. That ended up causing me to be more a writer than an academic, which is what I'd always wanted to be anyway. And so, in a sense, these obstacles or disappointments, they ended up guiding me toward what I truly wanted to do.
When you first started and the process of translating this time around, and he's been translated before, but when you first started, when did the light bulb go on for you that you had found a new meaning in his works?
Yes. Early on, fortunately, early on in the process, and I'd like to think I had a clear vision of what I was doing. In the past, I'd only ever translated poetry. And the Meditations is my first sustained attempt to do literary prose, to write prose that's literature as well. But when I approached it, I still had the instinct of a poet in that I wanted to sustain what I call charge, that is, excitement or liveliness throughout the translation. I didn't want to give the reader even the slightest chance of getting bored. And so, in what I found early on as the trick that would sustain that charge are the various voices that allow you to break up the sections and have them in different tones. And so I recognized early on the dominant voice is that of the gruff instructor, Marcus as the instructor propounding doctrine to you, a you whom he addresses. And that you is amazing. That slippery you is amazing in the meditations. In that Marcus originally wrote the meditations by himself, to himself, for himself,
It was a
right?
private
Not
journal, right?
expecting anyone to do it.
It was like a
Yes,
private
but he
journal.
addresses himself
Yeah.
as a private journal, yeah, private philosophical journal. I'm convinced of that, and I can give some arguments for it. And so when he addresses himself in that you, it becomes ambiguous both in the Greek and in translation, in that the reader can step in and inhabit that you. In a sense, the reader can't help but take that you, Marcus is addressing himself, as relating to oneself. You can't help but do it. So that was one way. That's the instructor. But then also, when I dug into the passages that are in the first person, I, those belong to a character I call Marcus the aspirant. And he, unlike the instructor, he can be vulnerable and human, he can make mistakes. And so I really do see them as complementary, the instructor and the aspirant. Whereas the instructor tells you what you need to do to live a Stoic life, we get to see the aspirant, the I, actually living that life. And there are other characters and many other voices from other writers and poets that Marcus includes in the work. And so I realized early on when I started translating it that Meditations was polyphonic. And I also felt that that aspect of the work had been neglected previously.
Have you thought about, and I don't know if it's going to happen just yet because the book is new. Again, it's called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, translated, of course,
Right?
by Aaron. Have you thought about when your book gets translated and sent around the world and it's translated into Greek, and now the Greeks will be reading a translation of a Greek text? Have you thought about
I have not. I have had some of my poems translated into other languages, and I was very honored. But no,
I was
I
just thinking of the irony of it, though, in a
yes,
way. So,
it could happen. I would be excited. I would certainly be excited if that were proposed.
ha have you noticed any changes in your attitude towards life or your daily habits or your interactions with people since you did the translation? Did it give you insight that you were able to internalize and usefully or productively incorporate in your daily work or life?
I confess, yes. When I first started the translation, I was still assuming that I was a romantic and thus an anti-Stoic. But spending this work, these days dissolving myself into the work, just getting fully into it and inhabiting it, certain concepts in the meditations couldn't help but seep in. One of them is that help me deal with regrets from the past, right? Marcus says we only ever inhabit the present moment, right? We never inhabit the past. We can't ever be there. We can't ever be in the future. We're only ever in the present. That's all we can control our actions in. And so, in a sense, I came to accept bad things from my past. both because they're in the past and I can't change them, and also because of that perspective I gave you earlier. Whereas I first saw them as bad, like not getting that job, I subsequently came to see them as good. And that is a change Marcus Aurelius encourages. But also, the CBT aspect of it, that is, focusing on one's internal assessments and judgments and redirecting those. Marcus says our happiness and our progress as a human being is entirely up to us. External things don't influence it. It's entirely up to our assumptions and our opinions inside of us. And that really did help me as I was, yeah, dealing with the present. And so I was able to reject certain thoughts, certain distracting thoughts as mere distractions, right? And say, why are you thinking about that? What's the use of that, right? And so the CBT aspect, the self-reforming aspect of it, really did hit me this time through reading the meditations and translating it.
Did you find though that what he says is you can learn from the past. You don't want to forget about the past. You just don't want to. You don't want to internalize the regret of the past. In other words, you can learn some lessons if you review what you
Yes.
did or didn't do, but don't take it to the point where you're regretting it and that interferes with living in the now or working in the now. Would that be fair?
Yes. And yes, the past events are out of your control, and you
Right.
should be focused only on what is in your control, and that's only the present moment. Yes, exactly.
Don't you think too that your translation has a certain resonance with today's world? And what I mean by that is we're all connected because of social media, and we're also all distracted by social media. And here is a philosophy with a human touch that you've brought in through your translation. And do you see that if people read your translation of the book, Meditations, that it would encourage people to calm down, think a little bit more, not be overly reactive to a tweet or a post or something on television?
Yes, I do. There are many more distractions today in our world than there were in Marcus's world, right? We have devices with us 24 hours a day that can call our attention, right? We have all kinds of screens and all kinds of things we can do. And so, interestingly, since the rise of social media, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations has been selling more and more copies each year. It really exploded in the 20 teens with the rise of technology, and now more copies, I mean, in all translations, are selling, yes, more than ever before. It just keeps blowing up.
Why do you think that is,
Yes,
though, Aaron? What causes that? Is there a human longing or need for some sort of order or approach that gets
th-
away from all the
I
craziness?
would say we feel scattered. We feel scattered. We feel distracted. And it's very soothing to focus, as he says, just on the present moment. And he says, before you focus on anything external, when you're focusing on the present moment, you start with yourself and say, is anything disturbing me? Is anything distracting me? And so that is a sort of guided meditation, a simple guided meditation that could help any reader. And so, yeah, I see, yes, contemporary readers sort of overwhelmed by stimuli in their daily lives, yeah, being drawn to this flame like a moth, right? So that they can, yes, get rid of all their digital distractions for a while, get rid of all their internal distractions for a while, and just focus on what's happening right now in the present. I think that is, yes, even more pressing in 2026 than it was in, say, 180 AD.
And I think the irony is too that we're using modern technology and social media to get the word out about meditations through, for example, this conversation. So it gets to people that may not be aware of the new translation. And have you read other translations prior to your translation in the past? I assume that you have, and realized there was something
Yes.
missing. I know that there was the stimulus for how you started this translation, but prior to that, when you were reading other translations, did you get a sense that something was missing in those translations?
I did a couple things. Yeah. I mean, I translated the meditations, and this is something I do in my poetry as well.
Mhm.
I don't want readers just to read it. I want them to feel it, right? And so where Marcus Aurelius is landing on himself because he's talking to himself, some sort of KO punch, right? I want that punch to hit the reader as well. And so I was opposed. I didn't want to do anything like the formal and aloof translations that do thee and thou. And then there's another translation which is quite popular by Gregory Hayes, the scholar Gregory Hayes, a quite popular translation. But I wanted to distinguish myself from that translation in that, as I see it, Hayes underestimates the reader. He simplifies Marcus's grammar and sentences. And so he seems to think too little of the reader. I wanted mine to be both emotionally charged and very lucid. But when Marcus writes a long sentence, I feel obliged, because I'm trying to capture his rhetoric and style as well. I feel obliged to give that long sentence, right? I make it as clear and concise as I can, but I did not try to dumb meditations down for the reader. And so, yes, as you're reading it, I like to think it's very accessible and very pleasurable, but there are moments where I push the reader a little bit, I confess.
The most authors, after they finish writing a book, don't want to reread their own book because they've rewritten it so many times. They don't want to reread it. Have you found that you've come back to it to reread it because of not because of what you translated per se as you, but just for lessons from him?
Oh, I have been rereading it. I guess all of the learning I was going to get from it that is going to improve me, that happened in the past. Now I'm rereading it because reviews are coming out. And it's my anxiety. I want to double check to make sure I got everything right. I'm like, oh, did you get that right? Did you get that right? Did you get that right? I'm rereading it for that reason. But I did, yes, and I'm surprised to say it because I didn't think I would get any any life changes inside myself out of the translation project. I really did, in the couple ways I have already described, and that was surprising to me. Um,
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, what would you like? I know this is a kind of a challenge, but what would you like readers to take away if there was one thing from reading your translation?
I like more than anything else in the meditations, and I love it, is Marcus's theory of strange beauty. He recognizes beauty in things that are normally considered homely or even ugly. He describes, for example, the furrows on a lion's brow or slobber dripping from a boar's mouth. And he says these are beautiful, and the perfected Stoic, the mature Stoic, would see them as beautiful because that Stoic would see that everything came out of nature. Even byproducts and incidental offspring of nature are beautiful because they emerge from that. And that theory of strange beauty was important to me because, in a sense, Marcus's Greek is that strange beauty, right? It's not normally considered beautiful, but it struck me as such and gave me that frisson. And so, in a way, I found a justification for my translation in the meditations itself with Marcus's theory of, yes, strange beauty.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been acclaimed poet and translator Aaron Poochigian. He's the translator for Meditations, of course, by Marcus Aurelius. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Aaron, and I'll spell out his last name again, it's Poochigian, Aaron Poochigian, and .com is his website. And you can follow him on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And Aaron, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure, Ira.
Thank you. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.